Hello and welcome to the 13th bonus video in the 20 years of MCF celebration. I'm MCFPapa. This is the 4th part in my 6-part retrospective of the MCF series, and this part covers what I call the elephant era of the series. This era is so named because it was when Elephant Games took over making the PC games, and they brought their own unique spin to MCF. I mentioned in the Swan Song era how Escape from Ravenhurst and Shadow Lake made me take more of a step back from the series, but just when I thought I was out, Fate's Carnival pulled me back in. Elephant Games had giant-sized shoes to fill when they took the reins of the series from Big Fish Studios, but I think they really knocked it out of the park with Fate's Carnival. The game has a few pretty big cons, but it also has some massive pros to it as well. We're back at Fate's Carnival to investigate a reported anomaly. We see a mysterious raven fly away at the start, and once we go in the gates, we meet with the ghost of Madame Fate, who gives us Isis the cat. I love Isis as a companion character. There are many points in the game where you can't get something on your own, so you'll use Isis, who will spawn into the scene and then help you. They gave her a ton of animations and she's used all throughout the main game and bonus game. She'll even purr cutely when you mouse over her. I think the developers saw Madame Fate having a cat in the first game, and so they came up with Isis. I'm not sure if the cat in Madame Fate is supposed to retroactively be Isis too, but I like to think it is. The main villain this time around is Alistair Dalamar, Charles's father. I like they didn't try to do yet another Ravenhurst sequel to introduce him, instead introducing him here, which makes it a bit more unique. In Madame Fate, her crystal ball was just able to let her see into the future, but this game establishes the Ball of Fate has a lot more significant powers. Madame Fate trapped Alistair Dalamar in the ball as revenge because he tried to take it from her. This game has some really cool plot points, some interesting ideas, and some captivating additions to the lore, but it doesn't always make much sense how they fit in with other games in the series. Alistair's an interesting villain, but I have absolutely no idea how the heck he would ever desire to be with Abigail in order to make Charles, and that's something I really don't want to picture either. Abigail seems like an insanely unpleasant person, and why, after centuries of living, did Alistair finally decide to have a child with her out of all the women in the world? Why would Alistair allow Abigail to raise Charles on her own instead of raising him himself in order to mold and shape him? And why would Alistair allow himself to be locked up at the Manchester Provincial Lunatic Asylum, fake his own death there, and then make contact with Charles while in the asylum itself instead of trying to contact him anywhere else? It really feels like Big Fish Studios had a totally different idea of what they wanted to take the Charles's father plotline, but Elephant went with their own interpretation, and it just leaves the plot feeling muddy and confusing. Alistair's depicted as working at the Carnival for a time, presumably because he wanted to ingratiate himself to Madame Fate so she'd give him the Ball of Fate. However, this game never references the fact that Charles was also a carny at Fate's Carnival. Now maybe these inconsistencies with Escape from Ravenhurst could be explained as Charles being an unreliable narrator in that game, building things that weren't actually true, but I always felt that Escape was being totally honest about Charles in its depictions. In this game, we reunite with many of the carnies from the original Madame Fate. They're trapped in various torture contraptions set up by Alistair, and we need to save them. I loved this concept when I first played the game, and it's such a cool reversal from in Madame Fate, where we were learning how each of the carnies was going to be doomed, but here in this game, we're working to undoom them. But a big issue I have with the game is that it abandons this concept halfway through. Only 6 carnies are trapped and freed by us. For Franco the Excessive, Art the Carney, and Tabitha the Lion Tamer, they're totally dead. They don't get cool updated character designs like the others had, unless you want to count a skeleton as an updated design. And I think it's a real shame because Tabitha was one of my favorite carnies, and Art the Carney was the only character from Prime Suspects to ever reappear in the series. Dante the Tattooed Man, Dr. Goodwell Medicine Man, and Mel and Amber Tan Acrobats are evil in this game and working as Alistair's lackeys. I can kind of see what they were trying to do with them, but all they serve as are one-screen obstacles for us to overcome without much interaction with them at all. The Master Detective straight up murders Dr. Goodwell by electrocuting him, and murders the acrobats by summoning a flock of ravens that push him off a ledge. I mean, yeah, I guess they were evil, but did they really deserve death? I don't know. Even more egregious is the fact that 3 carnies don't show up at all in this game. Twyla Twangle Contortionist, Armando the Ringmaster, and Lucy the Bearded Beauty. Lucy really surprises me because she was one of the most common carnies in the original Madame Fate, so it's weird they didn't bring her back. And even though they're evil, it was nice to see the acrobats up close for once. It would have been great to see the Ringmaster and Contortionist too, since they didn't get any hidden object scenes in the original game. But still more egregious than that is how it makes no sense for any of the carnies to still be alive. In Madame Fate, every single one of them was shown to die at midnight, just like Madame Fate herself. But in Fate's Carnival, they explain it as long thought dead. Many of the carnies are actually Dalamar's prisoners. But this explanation doesn't work at all. We know for a fact the Ball of Fate has real power and correctly predicts Madame Fate dying at midnight and predicts that the Master Detective will return to Ravenhurst. So why were her predictions about the other deaths incorrect? There's no evidence in-game for this, but my best headcanon is that Alistair being trapped in the ball meant he could influence it and give false predictions to keep Madame Fate occupied and distracted until Charles would be able to arrive and kill her. And another question is whether the carnies are alive or if they're just ghosts. I mean, factually, Larry could not still be a living person when he's sawed in half, and Marlena would drown by being trapped in her fish tank. When we rescue a carny, they disappear in a puff of smoke, also implying that they're ghosts. But Madame Fate, who's explicitly confirmed to be a ghost, looks a lot different from the carnies, who seem more flesh and blood. If they are ghosts, then why is it that only 6 of them were kept and tortured, while 3 didn't even come back as ghosts and were fully dead? Or if they aren't ghosts and are supposed to be real people, then why the heck would Elephant bring all the carnies back and say they didn't die in Madame Fate, only to kill off 3 of them again? The whole thing just feels like a jumbled mess, and I don't really fully understand what they were trying to go for. Maybe the game had several alterations to its plot during development. I'm not sure. Other than that, my other big complaint in the story is I wish they had done more with Madame Fate herself. She appears in the opening, and then after we inadvertently free Alistair from the ball, he makes the carnival vanish and we can visit her tomb. there we free her skeleton, and she tells us to find the Book of Black Magic and pierce it with silver, but she tells us this around the 33% point of the game, and we don't do that until the very end, and she never appears again in the story. It really feels like a missed opportunity we never saw Madame Fate talking with Alistair or any of the other carnies in this game. Also, she isn't sarcastic or cracking any jokes like she loved to do in the first game. And she talks with much more of an old woman sounding voice rather than the exotic accent she had. But I guess it could be explained that it really was a fake voice in the first game. She just put on to sound more mysterious to customers of the carnival. I'll give Elephant some credit with the story though. It does have a pretty epic ending. Alistair built his immortality machine out of the Ferris wheel, and I appreciate they gave the Ferris wheel a significant role in this game when it didn't get any hidden object scene in Madame Fate. We finally get to the Black Diary and use the silver dagger on it, but then Alistair reveals it was a decoy. However, the notebook we've been carrying around for the whole game is the real diary, and so we stab it with our silver MCF badge to defeat Alistair and make the Ferris wheel explode. So Alistair has been defeated, or has he? Because his raven Thanatos, which contains a part of Alistair's skull, is still around. And unlike Shadow Lake's end credits cliffhanger, this one will actually get followed up on. The environment design is excellent in this game. It keeps the rundown feeling of the carnival that we had in the first game. I would have liked to see more areas from the original brought back. The only major ones we see are the Mermaid Dunk and Incinerator. Now, why didn't Elephant bring back a great location from the original like the outhouse? But something I like is that all the new areas feel consistent in design with the first game, even if they didn't actually appear there. The discarded slot machine graveyard, the old-fashioned diner, the day and night theater, they all fit in well with the carnival. My favorite parts are the mutoscope stands, where you view cutscenes styled as old-timey films and get some items as a reward for them. I'm not sure who made these films in-game, since they show relatively current events like Charles and Victor dying, but I guess it's some journalist who swears that mutoscope reels are the best way to present the news, like those who maintain vinyl records are the best music format. I don't know. Speaking of the mutoscopes, one contains a jump scare where Alistair's eyes will pop out of the rectangle boundaries of the film. Shadow Lake relied quite a bit on jump scares for its horror, and while yeah, sometimes they would be predictable or fall flat, they could still be quite unsettling at times, or at the very least fit the story with the teacher's ghost haunting his burned out house, or the prisoner haunting the prison cell. With Fate's Carnival, its jump scares are even more predictable than Shadow Lake's, and are equivalent to someone just saying "boo" to you. That's how I feel about them. Some cutscenes don't even really make sense with how they're trying so hard to be scary. Like, oh no, the angel statue is crying now. Oh no, Dante has red eyes. Do you believe it? Red eyes. Run for the hills in terror. The earlier MCF games had maybe a dozen or so puzzles in them, but Fate's Carnival has exponentially more. There are a few full-screen single puzzles that were common in earlier games, but most of these full-screen puzzles are super puzzles, which were brought back in full force for this game. These are fantastic, they're vibrant and colorful, and while sometimes they feature a bunch of smaller puzzles within them, there's still quite a bit of interactivity within these. They're a nice step up in complexity from the super puzzles found in Ravenhurst, and they even included a nice little puzzle hint button that tells you what to do about the current step of the puzzle without spoiling the whole thing for you. But if that's not enough puzzles for you, there's also a ton of smaller puzzles and vignettes. Almost every room you visit has at least one of these puzzles, and while there are some rooms that don't have a puzzle, there are also rooms that have two of these sorts of puzzles to compensate. And then there are still more puzzles in the form of pages you can find for Alistair Dalamar's notebook. These also have many rewards to solving them. You can get cards, bobbleheads, and old pounds from the pages. Well, if you own the collector's edition anyway. If you only have the standard edition, I guess the reward is just unlocking an interesting artwork and having a bit more lore reveals. I would have liked to see a bit more actual text in the journal, like Alistair Dalamar's writings, but I'm very happy with how it was in-game. It's a great concept to offer optional puzzles to players who want more content in the main story, but if a person wants to totally skip these, they can too. They aren't important. This game marked the return of the crime computer. The last game it appeared in was Dire Grove. It now serves as just a hint and skip feature, which isn't much, but it's nice to see something that's been with the Master Detective since Huntsville return, even in a small role. And the crime computer would reappear in every entry of the series after this. Hidden object scenes are back to being one singular screen. There are generally 3 items in each scene colored blue on the list, meaning they require you to interact with the scene in some way. Whether that's combining 2 items together or solving a mini puzzle for yet more puzzles in the game. Interactive items was something the original Madame Fate introduced in its interior hidden object scenes, so it's very fitting that Fate's Carnival brought them back. That being said, none of the hidden object scenes have randomized items, and none of the future entries in the series would either. This is a big issue I have with many of the modern hidden object games, because by not having randomized items, it means they have much less replayability. You can basically just click on each item that sticks out in a scene without even looking at the item list, and you'll probably find most of them. It says a lot that a game from 2005 with just a handful of developers were able to have scenes with dozens of randomized items in each of them, but a much larger team with more budget and far higher end of computers aren't. And is randomization really explicitly required? No, not at all. However, I feel it indicates that the other developers have less passion for the entries compared to what Big Fish Studios had. Games are good enough without having randomized scenes, so why bother spending the extra effort to put them in? We gotta get the game done on time. But I just personally love randomized hidden object scenes and consider them one of the redeeming factors for a game. Like, the Malgrave incident has a fairly weak story, but I'm able to forgive that and still consider it part of the golden era, and one of the reasons for that is because it has plenty of randomized hidden object scenes, and even allows you to freely replay them after beating the game, with different item lists each time. Many modern MCF games allow you to replay the hidden object scenes too, or at least charge you extra for the privilege in the collector's editions. But what's the point of redoing them when it's the same exact thing each time? A game is able to be really great due to other elements besides this, and I feel Fate's Carnival is great because of its other elements, but without one of the redeeming factors, it's a lot tougher for me to love a game rather than think it's just okay or serviceable. Going forward in this retrospective, I'm not going to talk much about the lack of randomized hidden object scenes, but I feel it's a flaw in every game from Fate's Carnival onwards, even if I don't explicitly say so in that game's section. Fate's Carnival has the most substantial collector's edition I've ever seen, a huge improvement over the Swansong era's lackluster CEs. There are cards hidden mainly in the game's hidden object scenes, and there's a solitaire mode you can play at any time, but if you collect all the cards in the main game, you can play it with the 10s through aces, themed around characters from Madame Fate and Ravenhurst. The King of Diamonds is even an updated version of Armando the Ringmaster's design, which they never used. Presumably he was planned to be in the game but then was cut content. There are morphing bobbleheads based on Ravenhurst, Diregrove, and 13th Skull, scattered around the world, providing a nice little museum for the golden era of MCF. There are old pounds scattered in many vignettes within the game, as well as a reward for the journal page puzzles. You can spend these in the shop to buy various accessories for Isis, and they even made unique animations for each of the items with her interacting with them. I don't like, though, how you can't afford everything in a single playthrough and would need to play many solitaire games in order to get enough money to buy it all. Fate's Carnival has the longest bonus game I've ever played in one of these collector's editions. A lot of this has to do with how it was designed. It's very open in its level design, where you can go all over and collect a lot of stuff you won't need until later. It's probably the closest the game has come to matching Diregrove's open-endedness. However, another reason why it's so long is due to making things usually come in threes. I don't understand the significance of 3. Most items need you to collect 3 of that item before you can use whatever they go with. Most puzzles also come in 3s. Instead of just one constellation puzzle, you do 3. Instead of one cryptex code to enter, you do 3. I don't understand the significance of 3. There are 3 hidden object scenes added in the bonus game. There are 3 new rooms in our journal. And there are 3 new super puzzles. I don't understand the significance of 3. This does lead the bonus game to feeling somewhat padded out, however there's still quite a lot of fun new content in it. It's nice to spend so much time in the early game's carnival locations, which were walled off when the carnival became Dalamar's sanitarium. The journal doesn't have any puzzles in the bonus game and is mostly used for writing down relevant codes. However, there are 3 rooms which are accessed only by flipping to a page in the journal and entering them. A highlight of these journal rooms is the Snowy Oregon room, which even features a Spot the Difference puzzle that incorporates concept art from Return to Ravenhurst. The bonus game's story is that Madame Fate's soul is trapped in the grotto, and we have to free her so she can finally rest. In Madame Fate, there was never a reason given for why Charles even killed her. At the time, I thought he was just having some sort of temper tantrum toward the master detective. This bonus game gives the reasoning that Charles killed her in revenge for imprisoning Alistair. This helps give more context to the first game's ending, though I would have thought that another reason he had for killing her was because of his cruel treatment of being a kid kept in a cage at the carnival. Madame Fate's soul being trapped is represented by a cute little voodoo doll of her with 3 pins sticking out. With each super puzzle completed, another pin is removed. At the end, Madame Fate will give us a final prediction where she says, "I know that 7 candles in a still house and a dead man with frozen eyes lets a shadow from the past rise again. And for one of us, the place will become a grave." I still don't really understand what the heck this is trying to convey. We never see a still house with 7 candles in the series. I would think that the frozen ice comment means something to do with Dire Grove, but the next game has nothing that could connect to this. The "for one of us the place will become a grave" doesn't make sense either, because neither Madame Fate nor the Master Detective are really killed anywhere. Well, Madame Fate wasn't ever killed again. Perhaps it had something to do with Elephant's plans for a Ravenhurst sequel that got changed when Epix took over, but that's getting ahead of myself. After giving the prophecy, Madame Fate ascends into heaven, followed by Isis. At least I think she's supposed to be going to heaven. We know heaven and hell are canonically real in this universe because of Adramelech in Shadow Lake, but I'm not sure how the heck Madame Fate managed to get in. Even after the bonus game, there's still a bit more to talk about. Beating the bonus game unlocks the secret room. In this, we're tasked with collecting 4 items for each of the 6 surviving carnies to unlock a chest to see Madame Fate's final prophecy. Sounds great, but it's actually just replaying every single super puzzle and hidden object scene. Boy, you know what would really come in handy here? If the hidden object scenes had randomized items so it wasn't doing the same exact thing again. They didn't even bother to have the carnies' voice actors record additional lines for this. The final prophecy at least is nice. We get a scene showing the sign of Dire Grove along with Thanatos perched on it, teasing that the next game will be a sequel to Dire Grove. See, this is how you do a prophecy, simple and clear in its meaning, unlike the weird 7 candles prophecy. And this got me almost as excited for Dire Grove Sacred Grove as the Fates Carnival ticket in Shadow Lake got me excited for this game. However, I don't think it's really worth needing to go through the whole secret room to even get this teaser. Overall, Elephant did a pretty good job with their first crack at MCF. It had its flaws, but Fates Carnival did a nice job expanding the lore and building up Alistair as the next big bad villain of the series. I loved Fates Carnival when it came out, and me loving the game so much had a lot of consequences. I was actively talking about MCF, in particular Madame Fate and Fates Carnival, to friends on the school bus rides home. The only time in my life I've ever really proselytized to others about the fun of the MCF series and tried to get them to fall in love with the games too. I'd already replayed the original Madame Fate to death by this time, and yet Fates Carnival made me want to replay it even more often. All of a sudden I was doing things with the game I'd never done before, like tracking how often each location appears in it. It was during this time I played through the game without getting any morphing objects for the first time, and learned that unlocking the extra locations would replace one of the already existing ones. I even made a drawing of the carnival screen to map out the locations where the carnies will spawn. And I think the culmination of this revitalized interest in the series, in particular Madame Fate, is that I have a distinct memory of not being able to sleep one night because I was imagining doing a back-to-back playthrough where I'd play Madame Fate and then immediately play Fate's Carnival. I've had some games make it hard to sleep because of their horror, but this was the first time any game gave me insomnia due to positive excitement. So I give Fate's Carnival credit for this. No other game revitalized my interest in the series to the extent Fate's Carnival did. It was during this time I really came to appreciate the original Ravenhurst and view it as on par with the other classic era games. And for good measure, I played the Golden Era games a lot more often too, especially Dire Grove in anticipation of the sequel. However, it was still a bit too soon at the time for me to want to go back to Escape from Ravenhurst and Shadow Lake. But there are still more consequences for Fate's Carnival making me fall in love with MCF all over again. It was due to this I began to look for MCF related stuff on YouTube and found the YouTuber Tet, who was then known as Lord Abstract. And it was him being my first ever subscriber that led me to decide to start uploading videos to give him a reason for subscribing to me. And because at the time he did a lot of MCF stuff, I figured I might as well be uploading MCF stuff myself. If it wasn't for this event, I could have very well have become Nitrome Papa, Donkey Kong Country Papa, Banjo-Kazooie Papa, or just not bothered doing a YouTube channel at all. The catalyst which set this whole domino effect in motion was Mystery Case Files Fate's Carnival. For that reason, it'll always be a lot more special to me, and despite its flaws, I'd put it right alongside any of the Big Fish Studios entries. But before we get to the next game Elephant made, it's time to discuss Spirits of Blackpool, the fourth spin-off game from the main series. Just like Agent X, there's not a lot of material on this game, and it doesn't seem like Big Fish had learned any lessons. Agent X had a highly limited release on a phone type that was rapidly becoming outclassed by the iPhone, and with Spirits of Blackpool, they actually released it on iOS, but only in Canada, not in the US or anywhere else in the world. So it had just as limited of a release, and this guaranteed the game would have a quick failure and removal from the store. It's a shame because this one also seemed to have a good chunk of effort put into it. It's based in the town of Blackpool, and I wonder if any characters from the Blackpool Mysteries novels appeared in the game. Maybe. They seem to have other characters from the series reappearing, like Phineas Crown. And it seemed like the plan was a sort of live service game where they would add hidden object scenes and puzzles in periodic content updates, but all of the work went down the drain. And here's the crazy part of this. I can understand Agent X not being preserved or talked about much because it was made for Java phones in 2008, but for an iOS app in 2013 to also not have any gameplay footage or any news articles or information is just insane. They must have only had it up on the store for an incredibly short time, like as in just a few weeks or maybe even just a few days before pulling the plug on it and shutting it down. There's even less info about Spirits of Blackpool than there was for Agent X, which is even more insane. Big Fish at this point were heavily invested in mobile gaming, and I think it was a bad call to have made the game only for iOS. Even on PC, I think a live service hidden object game could work well, where you pay a flat fee and then get some nice free content updates to the game every week or two for like 6 months or something. Or even just have a full base game and sell DLC updates for it with new mini stories for people to play. But this was probably impossible for them to do because Big Fish's site is so awful and doesn't support DLC properly, like pretty much every other PC storefront does. With Spirits of Blackpool, the game wasn't even developed by some external studio they hired, but it was developed internally from Big Fish Studios themselves. I would love if Big Fish still had the files and assets for the game somewhere and were able to give it a more wider re-release in some form for modern devices, but that ship has probably sailed. I'm not sure how many of the people who worked on the PC MCF games actually contributed to Spirits of Blackpool, but it seems there is at least some crossover between the two. And since this game released in October 2013, this is the real final MCF game made by Big Fish Studios themselves. Now you might be wondering, why the heck didn't I include it in the Swan Song era part of the retrospective? Why did I put it here? Because I wanted to make a point by intentionally putting this game section too late. I didn't even know the game existed until after Fate's Carnival had launched in November 2013 and I saw the trailer included in its menu, but by the time I and many other people around the world saw the trailer, it was too late and the game had already failed. Since this game's failure, there hasn't been any other MCF spin-off made for a platform other than PC, so maybe at the very least with Spirits of Blackpool they finally got the message that they shouldn't be doing mobile MCF games. But who knows? You never know, Big Fish might try again someday to do another mobile game. But now back onto the mainline entries. A year after Fate's Carnival, we got Dire Grove Sacred Grove. I'd just like to preface this section by saying that from the moment the game was announced, I hated its title. It's a mouthful to say Dire Grove Sacred Grove, and it's such a weird choice to put a comma in a game title. I thought back then, and I think it now, the game should have just been titled Sacred Grove. That sounds a lot better to me. But I suppose by putting Dire Grove in its title, it might have shown up more in people's search results when they were looking for the original game, and it was probably titled that way to drum up more publicity and boost sales. Don't think it really worked out for him, but I'll talk more about that at the end of this section. I love a lot about what they did for this game. In Return to Ravenhurst and Fate's Carnival, even though we were returning to the same locations we visited before, there were barely any familiar looking environments in them. In Dire Grove Sacred Grove, they proudly recreated a ton of locations from Dire Grove. They tried to very faithfully recreate the game's layout and design. Even though some things might have been tweaked or changed, Elephant did a much better job striving for accuracy to the original here. It's weird considering they didn't do that good of a job in Fate's Carnival, so maybe they had more time for this game, or maybe they knew that they had to get it right to do more justice to one of the best games in the series, like how Resident Evil 4's remake is considerably more faithful to the original game than Resident Evil 2 or 3's remakes were. There are also several new buildings in Dire Grove Sacred Grove which fit in well and help add some more depth to Dire Grove as a setting. I enjoyed the story of this game quite a bit too. In Dire Grove it was all about isolation, but that meant the people who live in the area weren't really explored at all. The only person from Dire Grove we learned about was Dr. Patricia Anderson, the museum curator. But here in Dire Grove Sacred Grove, we learn both about a group of hunters made up of some of the townsfolk, as well as the Mistwalkers, a clan of druids who live in the woods and have strong connections to nature. Something unique is that we do a significant amount of investigations in this game. Crazy, isn't it? A detective making deductions from evidence? In hindsight, it's strange how little deductive reasoning there actually has been in this series. But at least there's a ton in this game. We gather pieces of evidence, and for every 5 collected, it leads to a cutscene where the master detective figures out how all the information connects together. I like how they made many different ways for evidence to appear. It isn't just always using written pieces of paper. And all the evidence has a character voicing the lines, even if that character doesn't physically appear in-game, like Dean Harris the weatherman and Townsend the pharmacist. This makes the hamlet feel even more fleshed out and inhabited by people. And with all this emphasis on detective work, they actually gave the master detective a voice. The first and only time in the series they've had a voice for the entire game. They even paid for 2 separate voice actors, so you can choose whether you want them to sound like a male or a female. I like having a voice for the master detective quite a bit, especially the male one, who reminds me of a classic chain-smoking film noir detective. In 13th Skull, we were silently interviewing people with one-word questions, but in this game, we ask the characters full sentences, which works a lot better. I would love for this sort of style with voice options for the master detective to come back in some future entry. I think it could add quite a lot to the master detective's character if we did hear him speak more often. It's interesting, there isn't really much of a villain in this game. There's no one big bad. At the end, Derek Crawford is considered an antagonist we need to stop before he sacrifices the child of the forest, a baby deer that's the child of Dire Grove's keeper spirit. But Derek was only doing that due to the mistaken notion that sacrificing the deer will bring his brother Peter back. And at the end, it's revealed Peter was actually the masked Mistwalker known as the Forest Light. I didn't really like the ending when I first played this game and thought it was kinda sappy, but it has grown on me. The story's mostly about the Mistwalkers and hunters putting aside their prejudices and working together. An MCF game with a relevant moral lesson. Can you believe it? But the most important thing I love about the story is it's pretty much totally isolated from the original Dire Groves. The Banshee doesn't appear at all, none of the students from Dire Grove appear in this game, and we only get allusions to the events of the first game, such as the statue of the Banshee in the ruins, and the standee puppet show recapping how she became a Banshee. But why do I like this approach so much? Well, this way the game isn't really shackled down by trying to make things fit into the lore. I explained the flaws I had with Fate's Carnival not making much sense, considering the things we learned in Madame Fate's story, but since this game's story is so disconnected, there's no real risk of having things muddy the original Dire Grove's lore, or even worse, actively destroy already existing characters. This way, they're able to go all in with telling an original story that just so happens to be set in a place the master detective has already visited once. Graphically, this game is very gorgeous and still holds up quite well 11 years later. I love the snowbound wintry aesthetic the original had, but Elephant, I'd say, did an even better job with it in this game. I appreciate how they kind of reference the way the HUD looked in the original Dire Grove, but they gave it its own unique style. The only thing I don't like about the graphics are the character animations for the mouths, which look kinda creepy and bad to me, and it's weird that both Elephant and so many other entries in the series had this sort of style, and that the developers actually thought it looked good enough. The super puzzles return in this game too, but it is noticeable that they reuse some elements for this game's puzzles. Like the arrows on the shield in this puzzle are the same thing as the lights in the first super puzzle from Fate's Carnival. Or how entering the patterns of colored notes in this puzzle was also what we did in the organ puzzle in Fate's Carnival. It's strange because a good 90% or so of the puzzle elements aren't reused, so it just begs the question, did they not have enough time to just make a few more new ones? I don't know. There aren't quite as many super puzzles this time around either, and there also aren't as many smaller vignette puzzles. However, to compensate for this, they added a ton of variety into hidden object scenes this time. There's some of the classic 12 item scenes still, but there's also many other types too, such as ones where you find pairs of items, ones where you have silhouettes of items, and even one where you're placing items into a scene. This was the first MCF game to feature different types of hidden object scenes, which significantly changed things up, and it would be how most of the future games handled hidden object scenes as well. They also added inventory items that can be zoomed in, allowing you to combine multiple items together to make them usable. This is another thing that would become a consistent mechanic for the series. I suppose with all these added elements that make the hidden object scenes and even the inventory a bit more puzzle-like, that's why there were slightly fewer actual puzzles in the game. For the collector's edition, there are many puzzle pieces to find in most of the vignettes throughout the game. These allow you to complete several puzzles which unlock screensavers that are unique scenes based on the characters from the game. For me, the reward has mostly just been the puzzle itself. When I very first played this in 2014, I tried using the screensavers for a bit, but then I realized it's much better to just have a computer screen be dark when I'm not using it, and I don't know who the heck used screensavers even in 2014. Also, for collectibles, the morphing objects this time are little buildings which you can collect to make a cute diorama of Dire Grove. The bonus game's set after the main game, and they reworked many of the locations to give them a cool nighttime aesthetic. The plot is that a mysterious hermit has attacked Dire Grove, causing dark black energy to cover many areas we need to get rid of. It's revealed that the hermit was the one who manipulated many of the events of the main game, causing strife between the Mistwalkers and Hunters. There's a decently sized bonus game here, and it doesn't reuse the same puzzles and elements nearly as often as Fate's Carnivals did. My favorite part is the squirrel Ulf the Mistwalker gives us. She's kinda the same as Isis, helping us to get at tough-to-reach places, but while Isis would help us for free, the squirrel demands a nut as payment for each job. Maybe she's part of a squirrel union, which makes sure its members receive fair wages for every bit of work. I don't know. We learn in the bonus game that the hermit is Alistair Delamar himself, but that's not all. We also learn Peter's mother Lily was a daughter of Alistair's. I would complain we don't know how the heck Alistair had Lily, I guess with some woman from Dire Grove, but then again we also don't know how the heck Alistair having Charles with Abigail really worked, so I guess it's consistent at least. And while we don't know the how, at least the bonus game explains why he had Lily, because her descendants can be used in a blood ritual to give him immortality. I like the plot point that Alistair had ties with the Mistwalkers. It helps establish that Alistair has been searching all over places in his long life to find new ways to get more powers. But I don't really like the plot point of Lily. Did the series really need yet another character revealed to be a Dalamar? I don't think it did. At the end of the bonus game, we defeat Alistair once more, but Thanatos is still alive, so Alistair still isn't stopped for good. After beating the bonus game, you unlock the alternate ending. I haven't really seen any other collector's edition do this sort of alternate ending before. It's essentially what if the Master Detective would learn about Alistair during the events of the main game. And what I like is that even though they reused areas from both the main and bonus games here, there's a lot of new things to do in them. For instance, the hidden object scenes are reused, but they have a different type of scene in their second appearance. And many of the same areas also have different tasks to do in their vignettes. The only real complaint is I wish they had made a new super puzzle for the alternate ending instead of reusing the same one as the bonus game had. Alistair was only depicted in his Raven mask in the bonus game, but here in the alternate ending he's mask off, literally. And for the ending of the alternate ending, Derek and Peter take a much more active role in helping the Master Detective defeat him, which I like a lot more than the bonus game's ending where they were just conked out. But even in this alternate ending's ending, it's revealed that Thanatos is still alive. I'm curious if Alistair was originally meant to be part of the main game's plotline. The teaser we got in Fate's Carnival clearly showed Thanatos perched on the sign. Maybe the alternate ending was going to be the main game's ending, but they rewrote the story during development and didn't want their work on this to go to waste, so that's why they included it here. But it is very strange that such huge revelations that are relevant to both the main game story and the overall Ravenhurst storyline are exclusive to the collector's edition of the game. But I guess that does make the collector's edition slightly more worth the price. I don't know. All in all, Dire Grove Sacred Grove's a very solid experience. I'd rate it roughly the same as Fate's Carnival, since each of them has their own pros and cons. But just because I like the game a lot, many other people didn't. It's the second worst selling collector's edition on Big Fish, second only to Shadow Lake. Fate's Carnival got a 4.5 out of 5 on Big Fish's site, but Dire Grove Sacred Grove only has 3.5 out of 5. They've never said an official reason why Elephant stopped developing MCF games, but my guess is that once again, money-hungry Big Fish wanted a lot more profitable games for the series. And so that's why they handed the franchise over to Epix, a studio that was more than capable of grinding out tons of hidden object games. I would have loved, though, to see Elephant continue to make MCF games. The two they did were excellent. A lot of what they made wasn't exactly something never before seen in the hidden object genre, but it was at least new elements for the MCF series. Things like a voiced master detective, a companion in Isis the Cat, a journal with optional puzzles, heck, even stuff like puzzle pieces to unlock screensavers, or an MCF solitaire game were pretty unique and creative ideas. Elephant at the very least tried a lot of new stuff in these games. And the thing with the games after this is they just began to feel so formulaic and samey, with barely anything new to offer to the series. After this, I feel the level of innovation plummeted right off a cliff. Another thing is the humor. These games still had the master detective give plenty of flavor text in and give some sarcastic comments on things in the environments. In the later games, there'd be pretty much no humor at all. The Elephant Era games were flawed, but I do think they were at least a worthy successor to what Big Fish had established. However, in the next part of the retrospective, we'll see what an unworthy successor looks like when I discuss the Epics era of MCF. So like and subscribe if you want, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next bonus video.